Okay, we're going to finish with some migrant policies and the effects of migration. Many countries welcome and encourage immigration, while others, actively restrict the flow of migrants, whether that's legal or not, into their country. Many countries looked at migration for many years as a way to improve their economic statuses. But as cultural and political views towards migrants changed, so has immigration policies. Really, y'all, it wasn't until about the 1800s that the United States really began restricting the flow of migration. In fact, many government policies attracted migrants. The Homestead Act of 1862 was a major example. You can see that reflected here on this line right here. An example of people wanting to come to this country to settle, to farm, especially when we saw the Industrial Revolution taking hold in Europe, and many people were being forced off their farms. Other countries have what's called a guest worker program, which is a way for migrants to come and find, in many cases, temporary work to improve the fortunes of their families, but also their new country that they are working in. We may see policies that impact refugees and really dictate the time in which it takes to gain refugee status. We may see countries who allow college students an easy path to permanent citizenship. There are many different situations where migrants are welcomed and encouraged to come into a country. On the other hand, many countries pass laws to restrict immigration. Many times they do so through an educational standard for migrants or by limiting the type of work people can do. Sometimes they'll go as far as setting a quota or a limit, which you can read about in our book, kind of the history of the quota system in the United States. Some policies are a result of what's called xenophobia, or a fear of others who are culturally different than we are. I think one of the biggest fears, and we'll see this in our movie later in the week, is economic. The fear that migrants will come and want jobs that others want, which in many cases has been proven not true. We saw probably some of the greatest restrictions on migration in America prior to the late 20th century was Chinese restriction acts in the late 1880s into the early 1900s. We see some other countries, such as Japan, who has pretty much restricted immigration altogether in an attempt to really but in an attempt to really keep their homogeneous identity. So then what are the effects of migrations? There's going to be effects on the receiving country for migrants. There's also going to be an effect on the country of origin for migrants. We've seen in many cases that immigration has boomed and has jump-started businesses. In fact, in the United States, almost half of Fortune 500 companies were either founded by the children of migrants. We can see many cultural contributions, food, language, diversity that migrants will bring to a new country. But we can see some negative effects. We see conflict in many cases arise between migrants and native-born citizens who might clash over a religious belief or cultural practices or access to jobs. And you'll see this in our movies as the week goes on. But then what are the effects for the country of origin, right? Where people come from. We know that in some cases it can be relief from overcrowding. We know that for many stage 2 countries, population is booming, and therefore many migrants will move. They will emigrate to countries or they'll emigrate out of their country and immigrate into countries where population is a little bit lower, or maybe at least they're further in the demographic transition model. We can see this as a negative effect. As working age people leave, sometimes they leave what's called brain drain in their country. We can also see, an issue with the dependency ratio. As working age persons leave, this can create an imbalanced dependency ratio. We're seeing many students who will go and study abroad at universities around the world, and then they won't go back to their countries to work. And these are all effects on the country of origin. You're going to finish this lesson by looking at what's called a remittance. And this is a really powerful aspect of migration. A remittance is money that migrants can send back to their families in their home countries. Since immigration generally is a move from a poorer region to a more wealthier region, we realize that many countries, their income depends on the remittance of their immigrant relatives living in other countries. So you will stop and you will explore that remittance. And that is it. We will then move into the migration stations, which will dominate the rest of this lesson.